Kohima Ridge stood in the highlands of northeast India, a narrow spine of earth less than a mile across, held by barely 2,500 British and Indian troops. Below them, in the shadowed jungle valleys, a Japanese division of nearly 20,000 men closed in from all directions. Their orders were simple: crush the ridge, sever the road, and starve the defenders to death. The siege would last 64 days. But this was not the kind of fight Japan had prepared for. What was meant to be a quick victory turned into a contest of logistics, endurance, and a revolution in the way wars would be supplied. Kohima would become the place where roads stopped mattering and air power decided who lived and who starved. The Japanese believed the defenders would fall within a week. But this ridge, this tiny patch of ground, supported by an airbridge unlike anything ever attempted in jungle warfare, would not break. What follows is the story of how that happened, decision by decision, flight by flight, trench by trench. In Rangoon, Lieutenant General Riniam Mutaguchi spread maps across his headquarters table. His army, 100,000 men and 30,000 pack animals, was preparing the invasion of India. The goal was bold: destroy the British IV Corps at Imphal, ignite a revolt in India, and open the road to the plains of Bengal. Japanese planners believed logistics would be solved in the simplest way possible. Take the British supply depots, eat their food, use their ammunition, continue the advance. Everything depended on capturing Allied stores quickly. Everything depended on British forces being unable to resupply themselves. It was a plan built on speed and on assumptions. But reality was very different. The British had something Japan did not expect: control of the air. And they were preparing to use it in a way never tried before. Lieutenant General Geoffrey Scoones, commanding IV Corps, saw the danger long before the Japanese crossed the border. Roads were useless in the coming monsoon. Mountain tracks were mud traps. Supply columns would never get through. His answer was radical. He would not rely on roads. He would not retreat. He would build fortresses around airfields and feed his entire army from the sky. Imphal possessed 6 runways. 2 were all-weather. 4 were fair-weather strips. Each was a lifeline the Japanese could not cut. The Japanese left assault column needed to reach Kohima quickly, capture the ridge early, cut the road, isolate Imphal, starve the British. But the Japanese advance ran into a position they did not expect. The 50th Indian Parachute Brigade at Sangshak. Brigadier Maxwell Hope Thompson commanded the defenders. His men were short of wire, mines, and fortifications. But they had courage, and time was what Imphal needed most. What followed was 7 days of brutal, close-range fighting. Japanese infantry attacked at night, in waves, trying to break through. Mountain guns fired with limited ammunition. Communications with headquarters became unreliable. Supplies dwindled. By the 26th of March, Hope Thompson received a stark order: break out, fight your way south. They did. They left behind equipment, but not their dead. And they denied Japan the week it desperately needed. That single delay meant Japanese troops reached Kohima after British reinforcements had arrived, not before. It changed everything. Japan's plan, already fragile, started to crack. Its columns were eating through their rations faster than expected. The depots they were meant to capture remained in British hands. The defenders would soon be fed by air. The attackers would not. When Japanese forces finally reached Kohima, they saw what they believed was an easy target. A small garrison, a tiny perimeter, a ridge barely wide enough for a football field. But its defenders were dug in tight: Royal West Kents, Indian troops, Assam Rifles detachments, and supporting units. They held Garrison Hill, Treasury Hill, and the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow. The Japanese encircled them completely. What followed was one of the most intense sieges of the Second World War. Artillery smashed the ridge day and night. Snipers dominated every exposed inch of ground. Water points were under fire. Wounded men lay in cramped aid stations with limited supplies. And within days, food began to run out. At first, airdrops were inaccurate. Containers drifted into Japanese lines or rolled down slopes beyond reach. But the RAF adapted quickly. Colored ground panels, smoke markers, new drop angles, standardized containers, red for ammunition, blue for rations, yellow for medical supplies. Accuracy rose to 70–75%. Enough to survive, enough to kill, enough to hold. While Japanese soldiers began slaughtering pack animals to eat, British defenders were receiving ammunition by air, sometimes landing almost directly into trenches. Kohima was still surrounded, but the airbridge meant it was not isolated. The Japanese were. Back in the valley, Imphal's airfields were transformed into the busiest transport hubs in the world. Dakotas, C-47s, and RAF transports flew constant sorties. Each carried around 2.5 tons of supplies. Ground crews worked day and night, cutting turnaround times to under an hour. On good days, more than 100 sorties. On bad days, none. But the average held, and averages decide wars. The airlift delivered 19,000 tons of supplies, 12,000 reinforcements, 13,000 wounded evacuated. Japan had no answer to this. No trucks, no aircraft, no fuel, and no way to stop the sky. Weapons came by air. Rations came by air. Medical supplies came by air. Even artillery arrived disassembled, flown in pieces, reassembled on the runway, and firing within hours. Every plane that landed carried life. Every plane that took off carried the wounded who would otherwise die. Japan had never imagined an army could be fed like this. Now they were watching their own forces starve, while the defenders grew stronger every week. At Kohima, the fighting reached its most savage point at the Deputy Commissioner's tennis court. It was the only flat ground for miles, a neat rectangle where colonial officers once played afternoon matches. Now it was the front line. British troops held one baseline. Japanese troops held the other. The distance between them was less than 30 yards. Grenades flew constantly. Men saw each other's faces. Rifle fire was point blank. Bodies lay in no man's land, unreachable. The smell of death filled the trenches. Artillery was called directly onto the court itself, danger close, unavoidable. At night, Japanese attacks surged across the mud. At dawn, British counterattacks clawed back every lost trench. The court became the hinge of the entire battle. If Japan took it, they would gain observation over the ridge's reverse slopes. They could direct artillery onto the drop zones. The airbridge would fail. The defenders would fall. But the court did not fall. Companies of the Royal West Kents, reduced by losses but unbroken in spirit, held their line with bayonets, grenades, and sheer refusal to give way. What happened on that tiny court, now a war grave, decided the fate of two armies. By May, the monsoon descended on the valley. Roads vanished. Rivers burst. Footpaths turned to oceans of mud. Japan's supply lines collapsed completely. Men marched hungry. Ammunition ran out. Illness spread. Exhaustion hollowed entire battalions. The British, by contrast, lived in an air-fed fortress. They grew stronger. Fresh units rotated in. Artillery expanded. Food arrived daily. The airbridge had outfought an entire army. Japan lost 55,000 men, mostly to hunger, disease, and exhaustion. Their westward offensive capability ended forever. The siege was over. Kohima and Imphal were saved, and the invasion of India died in the hills. After the war, a simple stone memorial was placed at Kohima. It overlooks the ground where the tennis court once lay. The inscription has become legendary. When you go home, tell them of us and say, "For your tomorrow, we gave our today." The story of Kohima is not just a tale of courage or endurance. It is the story of logistics beating strategy, of air power beating roads, and of a ridge that refused to fall. A siege meant to break British supply lines instead proved that supply lines could exist in the sky. On that narrow ridge in 1944, an empire's advance died, and the future of modern warfare changed forever.